Here's a quick video that's going to help you, hopefully, tackle the HAPP analysis in your next DBQ. So before I start, I want to remind you that HAPP is just one of the hardest skills that we work on. And of course, it was your first time trying it out. So remember where you were at as a writer when you were starting with context and synthesis and how challenging those seemed and how good you've gotten at them. The same thing is going to happen with HAPP analysis, I promise. It's just going to take a lot more practice. HAPP analysis is also one of those things that you understand it when somebody explains it to you, but then when you actually try to do it, it's really hard. So hopefully looking at more and more examples and rereading your work helps you out with that. If you haven't already, definitely reread your DBQ. Take a look at the rubric. On the rubric, it tells you exactly for which documents you earned HAPP credit or credit for that document. If you're seeing an X, it means that I recognized you attempted it, but your HAPP didn't work. So hopefully this video helps you figure out why. So first of all, let's just start with the basics again with HAPP. It's always good to go over just what each part of this acronym means. So remember that when we're doing HAPP analysis, it's a little bit different than when we're first initially working with documents. So our initial introduction to documents is always a paraphrase. When we paraphrase, we're saying what the document says in our own words, maybe with a very brief quote. When you do HAPP analysis, you're explaining why does the document say that. So if you find yourself doing HAPP analysis, just sort of repeating what the document says, chances are you're not doing it right. All right, so what does each of our options in this acronym mean? H we know is historical context. So what is prompting the creation of this document? What else is going on at the same time that the document is written that helps explain why the author is writing what they're writing? Audience is the intended audience. So who did the author intend to read or hear that document or speech? And how does that intended audience shape the document itself, the tone of the document or the style or the structure of the document? Purpose is not just to show something. Every document has a purpose to explain or to show. But when we analyze purpose as a HAPP analysis, we're really analyzing what the author's agenda is, which is something very specific, like they want to help pass a law or they want to encourage a revolt. And then finally, point of view. So how the author's identity shapes the opinion of the document. So a lot of people are misusing point of view just as what their opinion is. But you're not explaining the author's opinion. You're explaining why the author has that opinion given some aspects of their identity that you are provided. Okay, so throughout this tutorial, we're going to go through all four of these HAPP types to help you understand them better. And we're going to use the document set that you wrote your last DBQ on. So we're going to start with document number 1. By the way, if you don't have your DBQ out in front of you right now, press pause and grab it because I'm going to reference some of the documents and I'm not always going to put them on the screen. But here's sort of an abbreviated version of document 1, which was Robert Owen describing his model industrial communities, the problem of the poor and poor children, losing oversight and morals, so children should go to school and women should be employed, but also have time for the domestic sphere. All right, so before we get into HAPP examples, I wanted to walk you through an example of a paraphrase and analysis. Most of you guys are using documents correctly, but there are a few formalities I want to go over just in case you missed points using your documents. So take a look at the paraphrase here of Robert Owen. Read through that for a moment. Take a sip of my tea while you do. Chai. Okay. So here are the writing conventions that you absolutely need to use when working with documents. So you'll see in these first few lines, we've got a repeat of the author, identifiers, title, date. This is what we call attribution. So if you're seeing on your rubric needs at ATT, attribution, that's what I'm talking about. You should never ever refer to a document by in document 1. That sounds ugly. We don't like that. And the attribution is immediately followed by a paraphrase of the document in your own words. The readers on the AP test will want to know that you've got the reading skills to understand primary sources, and you show that by putting them in your own words. So that's our paraphrase. Of course, we can't forget a citation with the document number. If you've got your attribution done well, you don't really need it. If you forget it, it's not a big deal, but you should put it in there as a writing convention. And then this is followed by a standard type of analysis that links back to the claim, in which case a claim about family structure. So this is what a document use would look like without HAPP analysis. Okay, I'm going to put up on the screen 4 types of HAPP analysis, or 4 attempts, I should say, at HAPP analysis. And you tell me, you think about which one of these would get the point for HAPP analysis. Here's option number 1. Okay, so that's a point of view attempt. Number 2. So purpose. Number 3. Another purpose. And number 4, audience. Okay, do you have a guess as to which of those 4 would get the HAPP point? All right, let's go through them. Number 1 would not get the HAPP point. So this writer was attempting to analyze the perspective of, or point of view of Robert Owen, but it's not a historical analysis. If Robert Owen were a character in a literary novel, this actually might be kind of a neat analysis. But we need something more historical and factual to hang our hat on. We can't just sort of argue his character qualities. We have to really have evidence, proof of why he has this perspective or point of view. The second one also, unfortunately, would not get the HAPP point. You're right. Whoever wrote this, and by the way, thank you if I use your examples. Thank you for letting me do that. He did run his factories with concern for workers' health, but the question is why? What do we know about Robert Owen that helps explain why he expressed this concern for his workers' health? Number 3 does work because it does provide the why. And the why is provided by getting into some details outside knowledge of Robert Owen and his role in the national labor movement, his role running workers' cooperatives in Scotland and in good old Indiana. And that outside information about Owen helps us articulate his purpose accurately. Now, after chapter 21, you could also bring in his political ideology as a utopian socialist. But when you wrote this DBQ, we weren't there yet. Number 4, unfortunately, wouldn't get the HAPP point either. It's actually a really good example of how you might do HAPP for audience, but unfortunately, it makes an error in who the audience is. So, while members of Parliament might have read this document, it isn't explicitly intended for Parliament. So, it's on the right track, but it just makes an error in identifying who the audience is. Okay, let's try this one more time, and then I'm going to give you some other examples. So we're going to do document number 4, the Factory Act, pretty straightforward one. Very clear in its language about limiting working hours of people under the age of 18. Here's an example of a paraphrase and analysis. In this case, our attribution is very easy. All right, I'm going to give you some HAPP options. So again, you're thinking, which of these would get the HAPP point? Number 1, purpose. Number 2, audience. Or number 3, purpose. Okay, do you know which one would get the HAPP point? Are you picking up on some trends? Number 1, unfortunately, would not get the HAPP point. It's just too obvious, right? So that isn't really the purpose of the document. That's what the document literally does. It's sort of just paraphrasing the document one more time. So it needs to give a bit more. Number 2, this audience HAPP doesn't work either. This isn't the intended audience. So technically, the members of the working class might have read this act, but laws in general don't have a specific audience. And more importantly, the audience, in this case, doesn't shape the content of the document. It's just a piece of legislation. And therefore, number 3 does work. So like the first example, it's doing purpose, and it's actually not saying such a different purpose, it's just giving more outside information. And that's sort of the trend that you should be picking up on, is that to do HAPP well, you really have to bring in outside information about what's going on at the time, or your background knowledge of the author, or background knowledge on identifications about the author, like their class or their ideology. So a lot of times you just have to be giving a little bit more outside information. Okay, so I want to work a little faster through some of the remaining documents and just give you some examples of HAPPs that would work. So this is actually document 2, a very good document for HAPP analysis. And one of the most challenging things about HAPP analysis is recognizing which documents are happable. This one really is, because we're given the author's occupation, and we're also given that this is a newspaper with a very specific ideological spin to it. And those are both things that are very happable about a document. So here, take a look at this paraphrase and analysis real quick. Okay, so this would have been used for your claim about alterations to class structure. Here's a point of view analysis that would work. Anytime we're given an occupation, especially a historically specific occupation, it's a great chance for point of view. So use your outside knowledge of journeymen and guilds, because you know that these journeymen, as part of the guild structure, are aiming to climb their way up the social ladder. They're highly skilled laborers. And if they did so, they would one day become a very well-to-do guild master. So a journeyman, more than an unskilled worker, would be particularly angry or resentful in this case of the industrialists that are taking away their jobs and replacing them by machines. So you're bringing in that outside knowledge of guilds and journeymen to better understand the point of view, or why his opinion of the elites is so dismal. Because we're given information about who published this, we can also analyze audience. So you could call it an expose, and even though it's anonymous, we could understand the audience of a radical democratic newspaper. If you're reading a radical democratic newspaper, chances are you're a radical Democrat, and therefore you'd be sympathetic to the ideas that he's expressing. You might be of the left or a liberal, and you might mobilize to curb the abuses of laissez-faire capitalism. So again, that's a lot of buzzwords and outside information that's not in the document that you're bringing to the table to explain why the document says what it says. One more example. So here's an example of how we don't necessarily need to use a lot of buzzwords from history to explain the perspective of a document. This is that doctor and educationalist who's talking about the living conditions of the working classes, and at the end he compares it to the living conditions of skilled workers. So here's an example of point of view analysis that again doesn't rely so much on concrete historical buzzwords, but on your understanding of history and social class. So he's got a doctor's point of view, and as a doctor, he's concerned about the health of society. That's a historically safe assumption to make. And that's why he's including all these details on nutrition, air quality, physical exhaustion. And as a doctor, he's particularly appalled at these living conditions. You also might make a historically safe assumption about his social class as a doctor. His social class is significantly higher than the people that he's writing about, so he might be particularly shocked at their dismal living conditions. So it's not relying on a whole lot of outside buzzwords, but you are using historical logic to explain the doctor's point of view. All right, let's do one more little game. So here's the paraphrase of the Berlin Foundry Rules for Labor. So of the 4 options, historical context, audience, purpose, point of view, which of the 4 could you use to HAPP this document? I'll give you a hint, it's 2 of the 4. All right, could you do historical context? I think you could. Audience? No. Some people said that the workers were the audience, but really it has to be an audience who is shaping the content of the document. So in this case, we wouldn't want to analyze audience. We wouldn't have a whole lot to say about them. But you could do purpose. And we don't have really a specific author here. It's not authored by a single person with an identity. So we wouldn't do point of view. So now that you know you could do historical context, what do you think would be the historical context? 1840s, Berlin, Germany. You could talk about how Germany's not as industrialized as Britain, and that these rules are meant to industrialize Germany as fast as possible by purpose, maximizing profits. So the people that authored this set of rules wanted to limit workers talking to each other and being late because their primary goal was to make profit. All right, so let's come to some generalizations here, general HAPP-isms. Number 1, if it seems too obvious, it is. So for example, going back to document 1, you can't say he wants reforms because he's a reformer. All right, so if it seems too obvious, it is. 2, you really have to rely on outside knowledge. So I would recommend that when you're coming across source information in a set of documents to just do a mini brainstorm about the source information. What do I know about that author? Have I heard that name before? What do I know about that political ideology, about that profession? And it really comes down to choosing the right HAPP type for the document. So here are some helpful hints as to which HAPP type you should choose. If you want to do audience is particularly good for speeches, letters, and newspapers. So when you can ascertain the intended audience, and to always link it back to how the author is writing in a particular way for that particular audience. If you want to do POV, point of view, anytime you're given the ideology of the source or the publisher of the source, the social class or the profession, those are good indicators that you might do point of view. And for both purpose and historical context, rely on your chronological reasoning. What else do you know is going on at the time? This is one of the reasons why we memorize the dates list, so you always kind of have a sense of what else is happening at the time to put documents in context or to think, well, what is that document leading to? Is there an explicit purpose? Okay, hopefully going through some examples makes this more clear, but honestly, nothing replaces you and I sitting down one-on-one and talking about your writing. So if Thursday, Friday, tomorrow or Friday, you want to sit down and do that, just email me, let me know. We'll find a time to do it before Monday's DBQ. All right, see you tomorrow.